Be me, Felix wrapping up the last stretch of a demanding STEM program at a respected university. Not some prodigy, just someone stubborn enough to grind until things make sense. I actually like the subjects most people complain about. The department had a competitive edge, but it never felt toxic. More like everyone pushing each other forward while surviving the same workload. Nights before deadlines usually meant half the class packed into the main lab screens glowing, energy drinks everywhere. Everyone locked in, trying to finish their code before sunrise. People sharing pizza, helping each other debug code, lending out spare components for hardware builds. It didn't matter who you were. If you were stuck, someone would help. I spent a lot of my time helping the younger students first and second years. It wasn't for credit or anything. I just remembered how overwhelming it was when I started. A lot of them were girls who were nervous about asking professors questions. I'd walk them through a problem, show them how to think about it, not just give them the answer. It was rewarding. Felt like building something. A community. The top professor, Paula, was this old school legend, brilliant, tough, but fair as hell. She didn't care about your politics or your background, only your work. Her entire philosophy was merit above all else. If your project worked, you got an A. If it didn't, you failed. Simple. She loved the collaborative atmosphere, always said that's how real innovation happens. The department was healthy. People were learning. Things were good. Then they showed up. Bria Sheldon and her sidekick, Zuri. They were post-grad students from another department, but they suddenly took a very keen interest in ours. Bria was the mouthpiece, always looking for an audience. She was smart, I'll give her that. But in a manipulative, political way, Zuri was the muscle. Just pure aggression. She wasn't nearly as bright. So she made up for it by being loud and intimidating. They started a campus-wide campaign about the pervasive toxic masculinity in the STEM fields. Our department was their exhibit. A-flyers started appearing on all the bulletin boards, pictures of gears and circuit boards with slogans like, "Is the patriarchy in your code?" Articles in the student newspaper written by Bria about subtle microaggressions in the labs. She claimed the collaborative environment I was so proud of was actually a form of male dominance, guys helping girls with their work, was mansplaining and undermining their confidence. Guys debating a technical problem was hostile male posturing. It was a complete distortion of reality at first. Most of us just laughed it off. It was so absurd, so disconnected from our actual daily lives. We were too busy studying and building things to get involved in that kind of drama. But they were persistent. They started showing up in the common areas, interrupting study groups. I remember one time I was helping a first-year girl with a circuit diagram, and Zuri walked right up to our table. Didn't say hello, just stared at me, and then at the girl. Told the girl that she didn't need a man to validate her intelligence and that there were safer spaces for her to learn. The poor girl just froze. She looked terrified. I calmly told Zuri that we were just studying, and she shot back with something about me being part of the problem. It was surreal. Their big project, their grand solution, was something they called the Athena Initiative, a women-only STEM program, completely segregated from the rest of the department, their own dedicated lab, their own funding, their own projects, their own female-only mentors, a sanctuary where women could thrive without the oppressive presence of men. They lobbied the university administration hard. The dean of our faculty is a notoriously spineless guy. His main goal in life is to avoid any and all controversy. He just wants to get through the day without his picture showing up in a negative news article. Bria and Zuri knew this and exploited it perfectly. They organized a big meeting to present their proposal. The room was packed. They brought a bunch of their supporters from other faculties to make it look like a huge movement. Bria gave this incredibly polished presentation, full of buzzwords and academic jargon. She painted a picture of our department as some kind of hostile wasteland for women. She used anonymous testimonies that were clearly exaggerated or completely fabricated. One of them was about how a male student aggressively solved a problem on a whiteboard, making the female students feel intellectually violated. It was insane, but she delivered it with such conviction. Then it was time for questions. Professor Paula stood up. The room went quiet because everyone respects Paula. She didn't attack Bria. She just presented facts. She brought up the department's enrollment data, showing that female enrollment and graduation rates had been steadily increasing for a decade. She showed the grade distributions, proving there was no statistical difference in performance between male and female students. She mentioned by name several of the department's most successful female graduates who were now leaders in the industry. Then she looked Bria in the eye and said that fragmenting the student body and creating an us versus them mentality is academic poison. She argued that the best way to prepare students for the real world is to have them work in diverse, mixed-gender teams, just like they would in any major company. She finished by saying that excellence is gender-blind, and the department should focus on that, not on divisive identity politics. It was a masterclass in calm, rational debate for a moment. I thought she had won. The logic was undeniable, but Bria and Zuri weren't there to debate logic. Zuri stood up and just started shouting, accused Paula of being a pick-me and having internalized misogyny, yelled that Paula was a traitor to her gender, pulling up the ladder behind her so other women couldn't climb it. It was a vile, personal attack. Bria then stepped in, all calm and collected, and said she was disappointed to see a senior female faculty member so invested in upholding the patriarchal status quo. She hinted that if the university didn't take this issue seriously, they had friends in the national media who would be very interested in a story about a school that silences female voices. That was the kill shot. I saw the color drain from the dean's face. The mere mention of the media sent him into a full-blown panic. He immediately stood up and cut the debate short. He started talking about the university's unwavering commitment to progress and how it's vital to listen to marginalized voices. He basically folded right there on the spot. A week later, the email went out. The Athena initiative was approved. It got even worse a few days after that. Another announcement came a major tech corporation. One of those giants that's always in some kind of PR trouble had stepped in as a sponsor. They were pouring a massive amount of money into the Athena initiative as part of their Women in Tech outreach. It was a PR stunt for them, a way to look good and distract from their own issues, but for Bria and Zuri, it was a blank check. The launch day was a spectacle news vans from local stations, the university president, the corporate sponsor's VP of Diversity and Inclusion. Bria gave a victory speech that was all about how they had finally created a space free from the male gaze, where female brilliance could flourish unimpeded. Zuri stood behind her, arms crossed, glaring at any man who was in the general vicinity. The first tangible change was the lab situation. Our main project's lab, Lab 1, was the heart of the department. It had the best computers, the 3D printers, the spectrum analyzers, everything. It was an open access space, the place where we all worked and collaborated the day after the launch. We came in to find a notice on the door. This space is now the official laboratory for the Athena initiative. Access is restricted to program participants only. They kicked us out. All of us. We were moved to an older, smaller lab in the basement, with slower computers and outdated equipment. All the brand new gear from the corporate sponsor went straight into their exclusive lab. I saw them unboxing state-of-the-art workstations and VR development kits while we were struggling with machines that could barely compile our code. The second change was the social dynamic. A new set of rules went up on the department's main notice board, a code of conduct, clearly drafted by Brea. It was full of vague rules about respecting designated spaces and avoiding performative competence. It explicitly forbade male students from offering unsolicited academic assistance to female students. I couldn't help the younger students anymore, even if they asked me to. If I was caught, I could be written up for a conduct violation. The department I loved was being systematically dismantled. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by suspicion and resentment. The guys were pissed. Obviously, we felt like we were being punished for something we didn't do. We were being treated like a problem to be managed, not as students there to learn. The girls were split, some of them fully bought into the Athena initiative, joining up immediately and adopting the same hostile attitude as Bria and Zuri. But a lot of them were just as uncomfortable as we were. They didn't want to be segregated. They had friends who were guys, they liked the collaborative study groups, but they were under immense pressure to join. If they didn't, they were accused of not supporting other women. The first few months of the new system were awful. The hallways felt different. People stopped making eye contact. Study groups dissolved because no one knew what the rules were anymore. The basement lab was quiet and depressing. The The energy was just gone. Meanwhile, you could hear the noise from the Athena lab upstairs. Not the sound of work, but the sound of socializing, music, laughter, a lot of chatter. It felt less like a high-tech lab and more like a clubhouse. Paola looked like she had aged 10 years. She tried her best to teach as normal, to hold things together. But you could see the frustration in her eyes. She was a builder, and she was being forced to watch as someone took a sledgehammer to her life's work. I tried to focus on my final year project, but it was hard. My project required a piece of equipment, a high-frequency signal generator, that was now locked away in their lab. I had to file a formal request to use it. My request was denied by Bria, who was now the student coordinator for the lab. The reason given was ensuring a comfortable and secure environment for program participants. I had to completely redesign my project around a less effective, older piece of equipment. From the basement, it set my work back by a month. The cracks in their perfect feminist utopia started to show pretty quickly. Though the Athena Initiative's flagship project was for the annual Inter-University Tech Symposium, it's a big deal. With major companies scouting for talent, our university had won it 3 times in the last 5 years. Always with a mixed-gender team, Bria decided their team would build a revolutionary AI-powered accessibility app, super ambitious. Very complex from the outside, all we heard was how amazing it was going to be. But I had friends, girls who had been pressured into joining the program, who told me what was really going on. It was a mess without the usual cross-pollination of ideas. They were stuck in an echo chamber. Bria was a good talker, but her actual coding skills were average at best. She was the ideas person, but couldn't execute. Zuri was completely useless on the technical side. Her role was just to shut down any dissent. The group was paralyzed by infighting arguments over who was the team lead, accusations that some members weren't contributing enough. They had created their safe space. But it turned out to be a hotbed of drama and inefficiency. They lacked the kind of informal leadership that someone like me used to provide, not a formal boss, but just someone who could step in and say, "Okay, this approach isn't working, let's try this instead," without it turning into a personal attack. They didn't have that every technical disagreement became a personal conflict. The project was falling further and further behind schedule at the same time. The effect on the rest of the department was becoming catastrophic. The male students were completely demoralized. Why try hard when you're treated like a second-class citizen? Why offer to help when you'll be accused of mansplaining? Why be a part of a community that openly resents your presence? So, guys just stopped. They started doing the bare minimum to pass their classes. The passion was gone. The ones who were really talented and motivated, the ones who were the future of the department, all started making other plans. I started getting my applications ready for a master's program at a different university. I talked to my friends, and almost all of them were planning to do the same, or just graduate and get as far away from this place as possible. No one wanted to stay. The first big sign of the coming apocalypse was the midterm project showcase for the second-year students. It was always a huge event, a chance for them to show off their work. Usually, the quality is amazing this time. It was a disaster. The projects were uninspired, buggy, and incomplete. The students from the Athena Initiative presented separately. Of course, their work was just as bad. If not worse, they had the best equipment, the most funding, and total support from the administration, and they produced nothing of value. Paula walked through the showcase, and her face was grim. She knew what this meant. The talent pipeline was broken. The foundation of the entire department was crumbling. The dean was there too, smiling and pretending everything was wonderful. He praised the Athena Initiative's bold new direction and ignored the obvious failures all around him. He was living in a fantasy world, terrified of admitting he'd made a horrible mistake. But reality has a way of catching up to you. The university's enrollment period for the next academic year opened up around then, and that's when the first real numbers, the kind that bean counters and executives can't ignore, started to come in. The numbers that would seal the fate of Bria's glorious experiment. Be me, still Felix, watching the train wreck in slow motion. The enrollment numbers were the first shockwave that the administration couldn't ignore at first. It was just rumors whispered between TAs and junior faculty. Then Paula cornered me after a lecture one day, looking more stressed than I'd ever seen her. She told me there was an emergency all-hands department meeting that students weren't invited to. She shared the numbers with me later. It was a bloodbath. Applications from male high school students for the next year were down over 70%, not just down, but completely cratered. On top of that, the university's internal system showed that nearly half of the current male students in years 1 through 3 had filed transfer applications to other schools. The department was facing an extinction-level event. Paola said the dean looked like he was about to have a heart attack during the presentation. He kept stammering about cyclical trends and market fluctuations. Bria, of course, had an answer for everything. When confronted with the application numbers, she didn't see a crisis. She called it a positive filtering process. Her exact words, according to Paola, were that the department was shedding its legacy of male mediocrity, and that the men who were leaving were likely the most toxic elements who were resistant to change. She framed the 70% drop as a good thing, an ideological victory. She argued that now the department could attract a higher quality of female applicant who would no longer be intimidated. The dean, desperate for any positive spin, latched onto this. He just nodded along, a drowning man grabbing at a snake. But the faculty, the people who actually had to teach and run labs, they knew. They were terrified. The university's funding model is based on enrollment. Fewer students means less money. Drastically fewer students means a budget crisis. It means canceled classes, hiring freezes, and, eventually, layoffs. Bria's victory was a death sentence for the department, and everyone knew it but her and the dean, who was too scared to admit it. The atmosphere in the weeks that followed was even worse. It felt like a ghost town. Entire friend groups had vanished as guys successfully transferred out mid-year. The remaining guys were sullen and withdrawn. They came to class, took notes, and left. No more collaboration, no more late-night study sessions. The community was dead. All eyes were now on the Inter-University Tech Symposium. This was supposed to be the Athena Initiative's big moment, their proof of concept. Bria had been hyping their AI accessibility app for months in the student paper. She'd written op-eds about how their empathy-driven, female-led design process was going to revolutionize the industry. The day of the symposium arrived. It was held in the university's main exhibition hall. All the big local tech companies had recruiters there. It was a huge networking event. The other universities brought their A game. One team had a working drone swarm that could navigate an obstacle course. Another had a VR simulation for surgical training that was incredibly realistic. It was high-level, impressive stuff. Then it was the Athena Initiative's turn. Bria took the stage to give the introduction. She was in her element, charismatic and confident. She spoke for 10 minutes about the project's philosophy before she even touched on the technology. She talked about deconstructing patriarchal design paradigms and centering marginalized experiences. The corporate judges just looked confused. They were engineers and VCs. They wanted to see a product, not a lecture. Finally, she handed it over to the two students who were supposed to be doing the live demo. They looked nervous as hell. The app was supposed to use a phone's camera to identify objects in real time and describe them aloud for visually impaired users. They pointed the phone at a bottle of water on the table. The app's synthesized voice came through the speakers. Processing, object identified, fire hydrant. An awkward silence fell over the room. They tried again, pointing it at a laptop. Processing, object identified, small dog. Someone in the audience snickered. The two girls on stage were visibly panicked. One of them started frantically tapping at the screen. She muttered something into the microphone about lighting issues. Bria stepped back up, trying to do damage control. She said that the journey of innovation is often non-linear, and that the real success was the collaborative process. As she was saying this, the girl on stage made one last desperate tap. The app froze. Then the entire phone's operating system crashed. A blue screen with an error code. Total, unmitigated, public failure. Zuri, who was standing in the front row, immediately started heckling the judges, shouting that their male-dominated metrics of success were the problem, and that they couldn't appreciate truly revolutionary work. The judges just packed up their notepads and walked away. The humiliation was absolute. The news of the spectacular failure spread across campus like wildfire. It was the talk of every lab and common room. This, it turned out, was the final straw for the corporate sponsor. They weren't just a faceless bank account. They had a reputation. They had put their name and a lot of money on Bria's project. Her public implosion was now their public implosion. A few days after the symposium, a very serious-looking man in a sharp suit was seen on campus. He was the head of university outreach and philanthropic investments for the sponsor company. He wasn't some low-level PR guy. He was a serious executive. He wasn't there for a photo op. He was there for an audit. He met with the dean first. Then he asked for a tour of the department and a meeting with key faculty. Paula was one of the people he requested to speak with. She told me about the tour later. It was a study in contrasts. First, the dean took him to the basement lab, our lab. The executive saw the outdated computers, the empty workstations, the handful of demoralized students quietly working in the corner. He noted the general air of decay. Then, the dean proudly took him upstairs to the Athena Initiative's state-of-the-art lab. It was pristine. The new computers were all there, shiny and powerful. The 3D printers were silent. The VR headsets were still in their boxes. It was a multi-million-dollar lab that was essentially a social club. The executive walked around, looking at everything. He saw a few students watching videos on their new workstations. He saw a whiteboard covered not in equations or diagrams, but in motivational slogans. He asked one of the students to show him her current project. She hesitantly pulled up a half-finished website for a student club. He asked her a few basic technical questions about her code, and she couldn't answer them. Then he had his private meeting with Paula. He didn't ask about feelings or ideology. He was all business. He asked about student performance metrics pre- and post-initiative. He asked about faculty morale. He asked about the number of research papers published by the department. He asked about the success rate of graduates in finding jobs in the industry. Paola, being Paola, gave him the cold, hard truth, backed up by data. She showed him the decline in every single metric. She explained that by removing collaboration and siloing the student body, the department's educational ecosystem had collapsed. The executive listened intently, taking notes, not saying a word. The final meeting was in the dean's office. The executive, the dean, Bria, and Zuri. I would have paid good money to be a fly on that wall. Paola got the summary from a devastated dean later that evening. The executive started the meeting by pulling out the original funding proposal for the Athena Initiative. He read aloud the promises that Bria had written: to create a world-class incubator for female tech talent, to significantly increase the number of female graduates entering high-tech fields, to produce innovative, market-ready projects that will position the university as a leader in STEM education. He put the paper down on the table. Then he laid out the reality. Enrollment, a collapse. Student performance, a disaster. Faculty morale, shattered. Their flagship project, a public joke. He stated that not only had the initiative failed to meet its goals, it had actively harmed the department and, by extension, the university's reputation. Bria apparently tried to interrupt, launching into her usual speech about intangible benefits and fighting the patriarchy. The executive just held up a hand and cut her off. He told her, "We are a technology company. We invest in results. We are not a political charity." He said that their continued association with a failing, discriminatory, and now publicly ridiculed program was a significant brand risk. And with that, he announced that the company was terminating its partnership with the university and pulling all funding for the Athena Initiative, effective immediately. He then stood up, shook the dean's hand, and walked out of the office without another word. Paula said the dean just sat there in stunned silence for a full minute after he left. Bria was apparently speechless for the first time in her life. Zuri just started yelling that the executive was a sexist pig and that this was proof the system was rigged. But the spell was broken. Their power source, the money and the corporate approval, was gone. And the dean, the weak, terrified dean, finally had to choose between saving himself and saving Bria. It wasn't a hard choice for him. He turned to Bria and told her that her divisive experiment was over. He accused her of misleading him and the university. He laid the blame for the entire catastrophe squarely at her feet. The next morning, another email went out to the entire department. It was a masterpiece of corporate damage control. It announced the conclusion of the first phase of the Athena Initiative. It spoke of valuable lessons learned and the need for a more integrated approach. Effective immediately, the Athena initiative was being dissolved. Its resources and lab space would be reintegrated into the general department for the benefit of all students, regardless of background. It was a public execution, wrapped in the language of progress. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Bria and Zuri were suddenly powerless. They had no funding, no special lab, no administrative protection. They were just two widely disliked post-grad students on a campus that now saw them as toxic. The students who had eagerly joined their little club now wanted nothing to do with them. They avoided them in the hallways. When Bria tried to talk to them, they'd make excuses and walk away. They didn't want to be associated with her failure. Bria tried to fight back. She wrote a furious article for the student paper about the dean's betrayal and the corporate patriarchy's backlash. But nobody cared anymore. She had no credibility left. The story was no longer about brave female activists. It was about a failed project that almost sank a department. Lab 1 was opened up to everyone again. It felt strange to be back in there. But it wasn't the same. Most of my friends were gone. The new equipment was there, but the collaborative spirit wasn't. The department was a shell of its former self. It would take years, maybe a decade, to rebuild what Bria had destroyed in less than a year. I got my acceptance letter to a master's program at a top-tier university on the other side of the country a few weeks later. It was the biggest relief of my life, a way out. The last time I saw Bria, she was sitting by herself in the campus coffee shop, staring at her laptop. She looked smaller, defeated. No crowd of admirers, no Zuri standing guard. Just a person who had flown too close to the sun and had her wings of self-righteousness melted away. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel angry. I just felt tired. It was all such a pointless waste. Before I left, I stopped by Paola's office to say goodbye and thank her for everything. We talked for a while about my future plans. As I was about to leave, she gave me a sad smile and said, "You were one of the good ones, Felix. Don't ever let anyone make you feel ashamed for being competent and helpful." That night, I sent her one last email from my student account. It was just a short note, wishing her luck in rebuilding the department. I told her I was excited about my new school, where I'd already been invited to join a research team that was doing amazing work, a team with men and women working together. I ended the email with one last thought. It's a shame what happened. We had a great department.